The following is a video presentation of a lecture delivered by Dr. Mark Crislip on September 19th, 2010 at Portland State University in regards to vaccines and the myths and fallacies surrounding them. This is brought to you by Oregonians for Science and Reason in conjunction with Portland State University. You can visit us at www.o4sr.org.
Powers of be. You know, when you do studies, you get people
Ethics panel.
the ethics panel, thank you. He did LPs on all these kids, which is not part of the standard protocol. And he found that they had chronic enterocolitis that he thought was associated with, he did not find an association between the vaccine and autism. We need to do more studies. And every study in medicine ends with, we need to do more studies. And he said if there is, we need to keep looking. He did, however, say at his press conference, the vaccine causes autism. So he had a press conference where he said that, and it set off a storm in not-so-Great Britain. And said that the kids should not get the MMR, they should get 3 separate shots, they'll do better that way, that they won't get autism, and that's the secret to autism. And this was a conclusion that wasn't supported by the paper. Now this is what was discovered later about Dr. Wakefield and why his study was retracted from the Lancet. He was paid £500,000 by a British lawyer in the 2 years leading up to this to do research to prove a link between autism and the vaccine. So he specifically paid half £500,000, which in American money I think is about 27 cents. And when you get paid, you're supposed to mention that. You're supposed to mention your conflicts of interest as part of your ethics for publishing studies. And he didn't bother to do that. He also did mention that he had a patent for a single-dose vaccine. I started this out by saying, follow the money and stuff that stuff. It may or may not be germane, but he had a patent for a single-dose measles vaccine, and he went and said everybody should get a single-dose measles vaccine. And most importantly, is they went back and they looked at the records of the kids who he said regressed after they got the vaccine, and most of them already had symptoms of measles before he said they did. What he did in this paper is he lied. So he had 2 problems with this paper that got it rejected from the Lancet. He was unethical because he didn't mention he was getting £500,000 to do studies, but he also lied. And as I mentioned earlier, he also did studies on kids that weren't approved by the ethics board. And the lumbar puncture and a colonoscopy for a study is something you do as an ethical physician that you'd want to get permission from your board to do. And they're very picky that way. So consequently, as you probably know, his study was retracted, and just 2 weeks ago, he got his license yanked in England to practice medicine. Oddly enough, however, he's still considered a hero in the autism world of people who think that vaccines cause autism. And they call this a public lynching and shaming of Dr. Wakefield. It's unwarranted and overwrought, according to, who was this? David Kirby on the Huffington Post. There's ever been a source of information that's wrong with the medical part of the Huffington Post. That's a whole different topic. I mean, to me, the guy's a dirtbag, but not everyone thinks so. There have been, though, if you publish a study, you're going to have to do more studies. So has this study been validated by others? No, it has not. People have said, well, is this true? Is it causing colitis? Is it causing regression? Is it causing autism? And so there's been at least 3 studies that have shown no. They've looked to see if kids have more colonic disease. They do not. They've looked to see if the MMR and autism is correlated. They have not. They've looked for measles in the colons of kids and not found it. The best study was this one out of pediatrics, I think, which they tried to repeat it, and they looked for the presence of autism and enteropathy in kids with measles, and they could not find it. So part of the consequence of this study is a whole bunch of kids got to have other studies done to try and replicate his work, which turned out to be fraudulent. This is a study out of Poland where they looked at the presence of autism in people who got no vaccine, and people who got 1 vaccine, and people who got the classic MMR. And the vaccines were protected. No vaccines had higher autism rate than 1 vaccine, which had higher autism rates than the classic MMR vaccine. Now, this could be just study noise. It's going to have to be repeated, because when you do epidemiologic studies, you often get data that may not be true. So this may not be true. However, measles affects the brain, chickenpox affects the brain, mumps affects the brain. These are all neurotropic agents. And there's always been this literature about is some forms of mental illness an infectious disease. There's some suggestion, and there's some data that suggests, for example, that some people with schizophrenia are tipped over by having infectious diseases. There's a virus called mortavirus, where if you infect mice, they get OCD with it. They keep doing the same repetitive stuff. And I've seen a couple of cases over the years where some young person has had an acute schizophrenic break. For some reason, they get a spinal tap, and they have a aseptic meningitis. So I would not be surprised, and again, this is all hypothetical. But if anything, this one study out of Poland suggests that the vaccine is protective for autism, and if infections could potentially tip people over in a subset, it could make some sense. On the other hand, it could all just be noise, and they'll do further studies to show it not to be true. However, in England, they've now had, I think, 3,000 cases of measles and 7,000 cases of mumps. And I always like it when people say, only one death. I don't know about you guys, about one death in a kid is one death too many. I'm not a big fan of people dying. I get to see it all the time. It's not one of my favorite things to have people do. One death because they didn't get vaccinated is one death too many. And the nice thing about this is that with the MMR, the M of course stands for mumps. England's had 7,500 cases. There's now an outbreak of mumps on the East Coast because some kid who was unvaccinated in the religious community who went over to England and brought back mumps with him. And there's now 1,500 cases of mumps in the population of New England and, New York and New Jersey that's been spreading primarily in the religious communities that are not vaccinated, but there are also cases in the other communities as well. The MMR, the mumps part of the vaccine is the worst part. So they've also had 55 kids who've gotten bad otitis, testicular inflammation as a consequence of getting mumps. So that's the big fear in young adults. Kids, 1 in a million get encephalitis, which is a worse disease. So when you have clusters of non-immune people, you're going to get these diseases to perpetuate. And the most under-vaccinated county in the United States is currently Jackson, Oregon, and the city is Ashland, where 25% of people, of kids in school, are unvaccinated or not completely vaccinated in Ashland.